following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to Ion Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Dan Rylance. Very pleased to have you with us tonight. And we're also pleased to be joined by two gentlemen who recently did a workshop for the Oshkosh Common Council, and they're joining us this evening to talk about the things that they discussed with the council and to maybe go into a little bit more detail about what they do as an organization. To my left is Jack Norman, and seated next to Jack is Joe Fahey. They are both with the Institute for Wisconsin's Future, and they have a very nice website that explains everything of what they do. We'll be putting that website address up throughout the show, but just to give you a heads up right now, that website address is Wisconsin's Future, all one word, .org. Wisconsin's Future, no apostrophe in there or anything, just wisconsinsfuture.org. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
We've tried this a few times and schedules, and then I was sick one week and you were sick another week, and so, but I don't know if you've been sick at all or not, but you look pretty good.
It's springtime here, we're ready to go.
Well, we're pleased to have you both here, and thanks for coming up to Oshkosh for the second week in a row, I guess. Yep. So. Anyway, as I mentioned in the open, you did just recently do a workshop with the Oshkosh Common Council, and the main thrust of that workshop was just a small segment of what you guys do, and that's to try and, I guess I'll call it closing the corporate tax loophole, for lack of a better word. There are some loopholes that corporations have, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. But why don't one or both of you kind of tell us, to start out, what your organization, Institute for Wisconsin's Future, is? You know, give us a little history, maybe what your mission statement is. I know it's all on your website, but everyone hasn't seen it like Dan and I have. So tell us a little bit about that.
I'll say a little, and Jack can say more.
Sure.
But Institute for Wisconsin's Future started in 1994, and one of the big things that started it was trying to figure out how we can deal with the fact that schools were getting less and less money every year. And so there was a real effort, among other projects, to try to change the school funding formula.
So it started with schools?
It started with schools, and this went on, and eventually we saw that there was a bigger problem. And it's very difficult for education or any other particular sector of government to get more money when there's less and less money for schools or for communities such as yours. And so we really started the tax project, and Dr. Norman really started delving into, what's happened. Why don't we have enough revenue, and why are we having to cut? And can Wisconsin afford good schools? Can Wisconsin continue to afford strong communities as we have for many, many decades? And the answer is really yes, but we just have to make some changes to the things that we've done, the things that we're doing. We're no longer able to capture the revenue that we used to capture from everybody. And so we've kind of gotten to an unbalanced and inefficient way where some people are paying way more than their share and other people are paying less. But the point of it isn't to sort of just close corporate loopholes. The point is to protect our schools and to make sure that future generations enjoy the kind of quality of life and good schools and all the things that come with strong public structures, good public safety, good sewer systems, smooth roads, great libraries, all the things that we grew up with. We want to make sure that future generations have those same opportunities, and so we have to figure out how we're going to pay for them. And we certainly can't continue to pay for them through increase it in property tax, but there's other ways to pay for them.
Okay, all right. Well, let's delve into the corporate tax loophole thing, because that's one of the things that you folks were talking to the City Council about in a workshop. And incidentally, why a workshop with the Oshkosh Common Council when the legislative body in Madison would be the one to act on anything here? Is it to garner support at the very most local of levels so that they can kind of lobby our representatives in Madison? Is that the idea, or?
That's exactly it. We operate in two different tracks that sort of are parallel. One of them is working directly in Madison with legislators, helping frame legislation and trying to figure out what changes in the laws would be the most effective. And so that part of our work is focused on the folks in the Capitol. But the more important part of our work really is in communities around the state. And otherwise we don't have that much influence ourselves on the legislators. Legislators care about their constituents. And so the way to reach legislators is to go community by community and have people in Oshkosh, in Wausau, in Superior, in Butternut, wherever, raising those issues with their legislators. And so that's the organizing part of our work. So we go around and we work in a number of communities, and the idea is to bring education and bring information to people, and then have them apply the pressure on their legislators so that the changes that need to be made in Madison can be made.
Okay. You're a bipartisan group, for lack of a better word, I guess. Nonpartisan, sorry.
Nonpartisan, sure.
And nonpartisan, and do you work with any lobbying groups at all?
Well, we are lobbyists ourselves. We have
But
to
I mean,
be,
beyond you.
We work with anyone who shares our goals of strengthening the quality of public services in Wisconsin. And
Are there any others out there in Wisconsin right now that you're?
Well, there
paired up
are a
with?
variety of organizations, I would say. I mean, for one thing, when you think about it, everybody depends on the quality of public services, whether it be through the schools or the roads. Businesses can't survive without good roads, without quality schools producing the employees. So we work with a number of organizations. We work with business people. We work with labor unions. We work with other nonprofit organizations.
Okay, all right.
But it would more likely be the public employee sector than private enterprise that would be on your team. Would that be fair to say?
Not necessarily. It doesn't really work, for one thing, just to limit it to small groups. And so part of what we try to get ordinary citizens to really appreciate and to value is these things that we count on and often take for granted. If we've always had something like good schools and good libraries and good roads, we can sort of take them for granted. We don't have to stop every few miles between Oshkosh and Milwaukee and stop and pay a toll for the road, like you might in Illinois or Florida or somewhere else. And so we're paying for it, but we often sort of take it for granted. And so we're trying to get people to sort of value these public structures and to realize, we often ask people, what do you love about Oshkosh, or what do you love about your community? What makes it unique and special, and why do you like living here versus somewhere else? And
It's not the roads, I can tell you that.
it's not the roads. It's not the roads. It's often not the sewers or running water. But these are the things that people miss when they're gone. But they're the things in Oshkosh, like the Opera House, like the parks, like the lake, like the proximity that roads give you to be able to get other places quickly. These are the kinds of things that people from Oshkosh have told us they love.
Sure.
And again, how do we take care of what we love? How do we make sure that we pass this on? And and like anything else that we love, whether it's our own individual private homes or our cars or our groceries or our clothing, these things cost money. That's just the kind of society we live in. And so we need to think, and sometimes there's this been this idea that, well, somehow we should just freeze government, which is sort of what's happened. We haven't given government enough money to continue doing next year what we're doing this year, or to do this year what we did last year.
Certainly not local governments.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's why another reason we're talking to local people, because it's kind of a mess in Madison, and it doesn't really work to sort of take a number and wait in line and hope they remember you when it comes to making deals.
Right.
And so when we have organized, not just at the Common Council recently in the last couple of weeks, but around a paper loophole that we were closed, the way we did it is we had a lot of community meetings, and then when the community was educated and ready about the effects of this loophole, then the community organized and invited all of the representatives from the Fox Valley to a meeting in Oshkosh, and Representative Coffert, a Republican, Representative Hentz, a Democrat, was there, and the community educated them on the importance of closing this loophole to people here. So, we didn't go to their house, we invited them into our house. And what a lot of people don't understand is that our local communities have less ability, don't control how much money we have. We're in a state system, which means the state collects the money and the state redistributes the money. And so when the state is letting money leak out of its coffers
On the revenue side.
on the revenue side, then there is less money. And so often we think, well, if I have a pothole problem or I have a snow removal issue, well, the person I need to get mad at is the alderperson or the alderman. Or if I've got a school problem, they want to cut the music program out of our high school, I need to be talking to that school board member. And it sort of makes sense, but what people don't understand is the legislator may have more to do whether you have a school, whether you have a school lunch program, or whether you have books in your school, or whether you have new books in your library, or whether the city has enough money to fix the potholes. The people have been letting the legislators off the hook, and part of what we're trying to do is educate people that the legislators control how much money the schools and how much money local communities have to spend, and whether they have to cut. And so they've been in a really unfortunate situation where they're elected and then they have to decide which important things to cut.
Sure. You want to dive into the corporate income tax thing right now, or did you have some other general type
Just
things first?
there's two really powerful lobby groups in the state. One would be WEAC, the Education Association, Wisconsin Manufacturers. I assume WEAC would be listening to you. I assume manufacturing would not be supportive of
Well, Wisconsin
the
Manufacturers and Commerce, I could talk a little bit just about them. It's a very interesting organization. They're extremely powerful, as you say.
Right.
They're the biggest lobbyist in the state. in
I got a
terms
lot of
money.
calls from them on the judges race.
Yes. And quite honestly, we feel that WMC, as an organization, it's peculiar. They are representing the interests, ultimately, of a very, very small group of business people. And as we see it, it's really running counter to the interests of the vast majority of business people in Wisconsin. And I'll give you a very simple example, and this will get us right to the issue of the corporate taxes. WMC, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, leads the parade of attacking taxes and saying we have to cut taxes, and high taxes are driving businesses away. Taxes for the corporate sector in Wisconsin, in particular, the largest corporations, are quite low compared with other states. Over 60% of the largest companies doing business in Wisconsin pay zero corporate income tax. And in fact, when we've looked into WMC itself and the people that sit on their board of directors, the companies that these men are the CEO of, and they're all men, 60% and more of these companies are paying zero corporate income tax. And so we have an organization that complains about the allegedly high business taxes, and yet the companies they lead, by and large, are not even paying corporate income taxes. We think it's a very misleading message. And because we have so much in the way of loopholes for the largest companies, the burden is then shifted not just to homeowners and wage earners, but to people who own the small businesses and the mid-sized businesses. And so WMC's position on this is really supporting the interests of a fairly small number of large companies that have the abilities and resources to use the tax avoidance techniques, and against the interests of the small business person who has to then pick up the tab because the big businesses are able to avoid paying taxes.
Okay, so Senator Dave Hansen wants a corporate disclosure bill. Could you just kind of explain the basics of that? And it kind of follows what you've just said, huh?
Yes. Basically, we think that there's just a lot of information about taxes, about business taxes in particular, that's hidden from the public. And I gave the example. Right. Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce keeps acting as if their taxes are high when they're not. We think one of the important things is just to provide information to the public, to the legislators, about who's paying and who's not paying. We've been able to do a fair amount of research into this using a sort of an obscure state law, and so we have lots of information on which companies are paying and which companies are not paying, and this is the sort of information we think does need to be public. This specific bill, a tax transparency, would require that for public companies, companies that have stock traded on an exchange, which is a very tiny percentage of all the companies, that these companies would have to disclose to the public how much they pay in income tax in Wisconsin, and what kind of techniques they're using, if they are, to shift their profits out of Wisconsin so that they wind up not paying taxes here. It's a way of getting information to the public that right now we think it's being withheld, and as a result, organizations such as WMC are able to, quite honestly, mislead people.
So you want sunshine?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why does Senator Hansen only want to limit it to, the publicly held companies? I understand that there's all these privately held corporations out there, and obviously when you have a privately held corporation, the key word here is private. Mm-hmm. I don't care so much about what their executives are being paid or what they're getting for bonuses or what they pay their people. But, if they're not paying taxes, I think the American public, people in the state of Wisconsin, should know that.
Well, on this issue, the main goal isn't to single out a company, bad company, bad company.
No,
it's to have
companies.
Information so that we can have intelligent tax policy. In order to do this, the notion is that if we had information on these companies, and it's a large number, maybe 1,000 companies or so doing business in Wisconsin like this, it gives legislators and voters enough information about the tax system and how it works that we can be intelligent in making changes in the tax system. But we don't need that on the vast majority of companies, and so there's no reason to, for example, make small business owners nervous and upset. Hey, they're going to be prying into my activities and so on, when it isn't necessary for the purpose really of what do we need to know in order to be able to change tax policies.
Okay.
So we're trying to figure out where the loopholes are, and because Wisconsin has sort of been behind the times of many other states in terms of updating its tax system to keep these techniques from allowing money, again, potential income tax, to leak out of the state. And it's not just income tax, it's sales tax and property taxes as well. And that's what we're trying to do, is that these large companies that have operations in multi-states are leading the way in terms of innovating. They have the most money and the most options in terms of using the techniques. So if the state decides to close down those loopholes for them, they'll at the same time be closing down the loopholes for other companies that may be using them.
Okay.
Perhaps we should get specific, because we've been
Yes,
talking
I was
a little
just going
bit
to say,
about here.
let's give us some names.
Well, let's start with a simple case. I would imagine a lot of the people who are watching this program on their computers at home or at work use Microsoft Word or some other Microsoft product. Microsoft is a company that $8 billion in profits, in their American profits, about somewhere between $100 and $150 million of those profits come directly out of Wisconsin. And Microsoft doesn't pay a penny in income tax to Wisconsin on profits of over $100 million. That's a very simple example. Merck, second biggest pharmaceutical company in America. Many people take prescription medications. $5 billion in profits in America. A lot of that coming out of Wisconsin, and not a penny in income tax in Wisconsin. McDonald's, PepsiCo, Budget Rent-A-Car, Stokely Van Camp, General Electric. These are all companies that do not pay a penny in income tax to the state of Wisconsin. Now, there are other companies that are really terrific. Oshkosh Truck would be an example. Harley Davidson. We have figures on these.
How about Gannett?
These are companies that they're paying their share. Well, Gannett I don't know specifically about because we haven't researched Gannett. But when Microsoft, Merck, Pepsi-Cola, General Electric aren't paying taxes, then whoever owns the corner store, the tailor, or the dry cleaners, they're having to make up the difference. The techniques that they're using are ingenious. They're designed by $800 an hour lawyers. Small business owners can't afford that. And these are the sort of loopholes that are there that are really draining. Estimates are that close to $500 million a year, that's $500 million a year in revenue is lost in Wisconsin simply through corporate income tax loopholes.
And you're basing that on what their annual P&L shows?
We
Or
base
how
that
do you
on
base
data, for example, Ernst & Young, which is a giant accounting firm, does a terrific annual survey of business taxes at the state and local level, and we base that on some of the figures that they put out.
Okay.
And Ernst & Young knows taxes, and Ernst & Young knows where the loopholes are, and they have estimates about Wisconsin and the corporate tax payments in Wisconsin compared with other states. Ernst & Young's figures tell us that if the corporate sector in Wisconsin were paying taxes at the national average, if their share of taxes were simply at the national average, there would be well over an additional $1 billion a year in tax revenue for state and local government in Wisconsin. This wouldn't make us a high business tax state. That would simply be if we were at an average business tax state, substantial amounts of additional revenue.
Okay, I got a figure that in I think it's 2007 or maybe 6, about $900 million was the business taxes paid in Wisconsin.
In
Corporate
income tax?
Yeah. It was only $500 million in 2001, so there must be some progress in collecting more corporate tax.
The corporate income tax goes up and down with the business cycle.
Of course, right.
Profits have gone up in the last few years until the recent recession, and that's why that we see that bump. But if we look at corporate income tax payments over time and adjust for inflation, they are actually flat. Corporate income tax payments adjusted for inflation are the same now as they were 10 to 15 years ago. At the same time, profits, when adjusted for inflation, have grown substantially.
Okay, I understand that, but you know, and you said a really good point that corporate tax thing is some years you can declare a loss and you don't have any taxes, but you've got all sorts of other things like Subchapter S and these LLBs and LLCs where the tax for businesses is not paid through the business, but is paid through the individuals, which distorts your corporate.
That's one of the beauties of Ernst & Young's study.
Okay.
Ernst & Young understands this because they prepare taxes for all sorts of businesses, and when they do this annual survey, which is available on Ernst & Young's website, they are taking into account not just corporate taxes paid as corporate income tax, they're taking into account their best estimate of, as you say, the S Corp, the variety of other ways that businesses are organized and pay taxes. And there's been tremendous growth. The Secretary of Revenue said recently that in Wisconsin, in 5 years, the number of business organizations that are structured to minimize or avoid taxes has gone from 5,000 such companies or organizations 5 years ago to 30,000 today. It's incredible growth in the number of businesses organized solely for the purpose of minimizing or reducing taxes. And part of our point is that the tax system in Wisconsin is out of date in that our way of taxing in many, many areas is well back into the 20th century and isn't reflecting the way the economy has changed. And so large companies have new techniques for avoiding taxes that are simply way, way ahead of where our tax law is in Wisconsin. And I'll just quickly mention a couple other examples. So we're not just simply talking about the corporate taxes, but if we look at the sales tax structure in Wisconsin, we have a very outmoded sales tax. There are no sales taxes on services. There are no sales taxes that are required to pay on buying things on the internet. So we have two very big sectors of the economy, both of them large and growing, and our sales tax system is so out of date it doesn't even touch these two sectors of the economy.
On the other hand, there's many states, for income reasons, have taken sales tax off of groceries.
Sure.
Wisconsin doesn't. They do tax groceries, right?
We don't. No,
Oh, you don't tax
we
groceries?
do not tax groceries in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Now,
Not food items.
Not food items. That's right.
Okay.
One of our sort of fundamental point about taxes is that what's needed to support schools and sewers and courts, all of the things that we need, is a broad tax system, because if it's broad, it allows us to raise the revenue that's needed and keep the rates low. But what we have in Wisconsin are huge gaps in our tax structure because the economy has changed and the tax system hasn't evolved with it. And so our view is if we can close the gaps and broaden the tax base, it allows us to do two things. It allows us to have enough money to support the public structures we need and money so that we can lower rates where needed to make for a fairer tax system. So that's really our ultimate goal. Close the gaps, broaden the tax base to support public structures and make a fairer system.
To me, this is a classic Democrat-Republican issue. If Cheryl's a Republican member of the Assembly and I'm a Democratic member of the Assembly, I want to get this corporate thing because my constituents, which are public employees, city employees, school teachers, want more money.
But what about...
But wait a minute, her group is going to say, if we get the disclosure that you're just going to find more ways to tax more, and I don't want to tax more.
Well, can I?
Yes, go ahead, Joe.
Okay.
We're all going to go into that one.
I think we just need to look at past experience. In this, I'll talk a little bit more about the loophole that was closed because of the efforts of people in Oshkosh and Winnebago County and other places around the state. And what this was a loophole that was opened by a court. And it's very common. There was a New Jersey paper company called Newark Paper. And they instructed their tax lawyers, here's the tax law, go find us a loophole.
Okay.
And they found one in a 1953 law that exempted sewage treatment facilities from paying property tax. And given the way that those words were put together 50 years ago, they said, us too, we shouldn't have to pay. We shouldn't have to pay any property tax. We should come off all of our property should come off the tax rolls. And so the state fought that and said that's not what the intent of the law was. You're recycling cardboard as part of your manufacturing process because it's cheaper for you to do that than to cut down trees and pay for them that way. But they were able to convince a judge that that's what the words meant. And so in Winnebago County right here, they collect about $55 million annually in property taxes. They're entitled to that money. So if someone takes $1 million of taxable property off, everyone else, every other business, every other property owner has to make up the difference. And so we educated people but the way we do the education and why we're not sitting tonight in Madison, why we're here in Oshkosh, why we're here at the Common Council, why we're here educating Kiwanis, Optimist groups, Chamber of Commerce's, all that stuff is because we need the local public, the people who elect the state legislators, to talk differently to their legislators than they've been talking to. Once they did that, the vote was, 100% of every Republican in the Senate and every Republican in the Assembly, every Democrat in the Senate and every Democrat in the Assembly, the Senate and the Assembly, both all voted to close this loophole. It was because of the way that it was being communicated. Now, if we would just sent that up to Madison and lobbied in the traditional way, it would have become very partisan and it would have become very ideological. But when you have citizens telling their Republican legislators and their Democratic legislators, if you don't close this, our property taxes are going to go up.
So
it becomes a different
unanimous
issue.
in
It was
both legislative
unanimous.
bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
WMC, who we
Okay.
mentioned before, they were against it, and there were efforts to stall it in different assembly committees. But there was such an outcry of pressure from down below, from the citizens in the districts, that it changed. And so that's how we have to approach these issues. It's not a Republican issue, it's not a Democrat issue, it's their local issues. Whether we have schools, whether we have libraries, whether we have roads, or whether we have a paramedic system, all of these things depend on having a fair tax system that provides enough money. And so if we make it a local issue and we make it a fairness issue and not make it a partisan and political issue, then we can win.
What are some of the, you gave us a really good example there of Newark Papers and, you know, the technique that their big-time lawyers used. What are some of the techniques that some of these corporations are using to not pay corporate income tax?
Well,
here in
there's one
Wisconsin?
that sort of became notorious called the Las Vegas loophole, and this is a mechanism by which banks, and their estimate from the Department of Revenue was that several years ago, 80% of the banks in Wisconsin were using this, and the number has dropped somewhat, we believe. What the banks would do is set up a subsidiary bank in Nevada where there is no corporate income tax, and then we're able to, in effect, shift the loans that they made in Wisconsin and transfer the loans to their Nevada operation. So the profits they make, which is the interest on the loans, was credited to the Nevada subsidiary. So their Wisconsin operations didn't have any profits, so there was no tax on it. The profits all went to the Nevada operation. That's one kind of example. I'll give you a second one. Walmart has done this, and it's a real estate
This is the
loophole.
leasing?
Walmart, in fact, they came out in response to when we started criticizing them, and they said, yeah, we do this. Walmart said they have 89 stores in Wisconsin, and in 82 of them, they use a particular technique where they have one branch of Walmart that operates the store and a separate branch of Walmart that owns the store. The branch that operates it has to pay rent to the landlord, which is another branch of Walmart. The rent is really high, wipes out the store's profits. The profits all go to the part of Walmart that owns the store, which is set up under a particular federal tax law that allows it to be tax-free. I'll give you a third example, and this is the logo loophole, we like to call it, where companies will take their logo and assign it to a subsidiary based in a state without taxes. Kohl's department stores did this in Wisconsin until they were stopped by the state. What Kohl's would do is they would require all their stores in Wisconsin, of course they have to use the logo in the store, but to use the logo, this Wisconsin store had to pay a very, very high royalty fee. To the sister corporation in another state, the fee was so high they didn't have any profits left in Wisconsin. The profits all went to the division that owns the logo. And I have a little visual aid here I just want to show you as an example of this. This is a cup from Arby's, and came from an Arby's that we got just coming up here to Oshkosh. Here's the Arby's logo. I don't know if it's visible or not, but it's the cowboy hat.
Yeah, it's just on all the Arby's stores.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then they've got their slogan, I'm thinking Arby's. And then underneath here is the fine print. And the fine print says, trademark and copyright 2006, Arby's IP Holder Trust. Well, IP in the tax business is code for intellectual property. Logos, patents, trademarks. So what Arby's has is they've set up a company called the Arby's IP Holder Trust. That company owns the logo and the slogan. So the store, the Arby's, has to pay a fee for the rights to use the Arby's logo. The fee goes to the Arby's IP Holder Trust, which is headquartered in Delaware, where there's no corporate income tax. So the profits of the store are diminished. They're transferred, in effect, to this Arby's company in Delaware, where there's no tax. So that's a mechanism that Arby's is using to transfer profits out of Wisconsin to Delaware and avoid Wisconsin profits.
Okay, this brings up a question that I have. If someone wants to, say, in their own small way, start boycotting these companies, do you on your website, and it's a nice website, and I've kind of scooted around, but I haven't seen everything. Do you have on your website somewhere a list of companies like this that people could say, you know what, I'm going to make my own little personal statement. It may not mean a hill of beans to their profit and loss statement, but I'm going to make my own personal statement, and I'm going to boycott that company or those companies.
We do have information on individual companies, but I would urge people, if they want to take an action, the boycott is not really going to make an impact.
It's
the way to have the
legislators.
impact, call your legislator and say, what is going on with these corporate tax loopholes? And that one phone call or letter to the legislator, that's going to make a difference.
It's understandable that people are angry when they hear about the Arby's or that Microsoft doesn't pay and all these other corporations don't pay. But basically their job is to pay is to maximize their profit and reduce their costs. But our job as citizens and our job as a state is to not let them abuse the system. And so we just sort of, rather than asking them to pay voluntarily something that they can figure out legally how not to pay,
Right.
what we would think it would be a better tactic to do is to not make taxes voluntary for these large corporations. Because as we told the city council, any tax, if it's voluntary, you're going to have less money.
Yeah.
You're not going to have enough money, I would venture to say.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, most people don't put in an extra, we just finished our taxes this week, a lot of us. And most of us didn't put in a couple hundred extra, sort of because they're doing such a great job, right? So we pay the taxes that we are required to pay. And our law doesn't require these corporations to pay taxes. And there's mechanisms for them to get out. Again, they're not necessarily available to small and Wisconsin-based businesses, which is really a shame. I mean, if you're a hamburger company and you have a mom and pop hamburger place, you've got enough competitive disadvantages against the Arby's or the McDonald's without having them have no income tax.
Right.
I mean, that's just a huge disadvantage for the small, company that's not taking its money, it's not cashing its, dividend checks in Delaware or other places. They're cashing them right here. So we really need to support, our local economies more by requiring, a level playing field for all businesses.
That's a reason why I would challenge the point that you made
was
earlier,
waiting for-
Democrat versus Republican. If we look at the huge gap that we have in not collecting sales tax on internet purchases, this is something that hurts local retailers. If there's a 5% sales tax on a product, if you can go online and not have to pay it, that's a 5% saving over what you would pay if you go to your local store. That puts the local stores at a disadvantage. Closing this loophole and extending the sales tax to the internet purchases helps stores in Wisconsin. Keeping that loophole open only helps retailers who are mostly out of state. That doesn't help Wisconsin, it doesn't help the small business person, and that's why it's not a Democrat versus Republican issue.
Yeah, I'm going to put my Republican hat back on again for a minute.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll let you put that hat on
Yep.
in just a sec. On the other hand, though, with internet shopping, you're almost always paying shipping and handling, which I think in most cases is more than the tax would be. So I don't know that people are, I mean, I still do a fair amount of internet shopping. I like the convenience. I don't care if I have to or not have to pay 5% sales tax, and I don't care what the shipping and handling is as long as it's reasonable. I like the convenience. I like being able to do it 24/7 if that's what I choose to do. And at Christmas time, I don't like dealing with the crowds or the parking issues, and I avoid all that. But I think if the company is based in Wisconsin, then I think they have to charge, because I know that there have been times when I
Yes.
have paid a 5%
Yes,
sales tax.
if you do it in Wisconsin. Now, technically, we are supposed to be paying sales tax on internet sales. There's a line on our tax returns. Specifically, it's buried in the tax return, and it says, did you make any internet purchases? If so, tell us how much sales tax you should have paid, and please submit that. It's a voluntary
thing again.
thing on the tax form. But all across the country, the states are wrestling with this, and there is a national project called the Streamlined Sales Tax Project. And it is working when enough states have joined in this effort and coordinated their sales tax policies. The national internet companies have said they will begin charging sales tax and then remitting it back to the states. So what we want is for Wisconsin to become a part of this national effort. About half the states have joined. Wisconsin has held back and is not yet a part of it. So this goes back to our theme that Wisconsin is not modernizing its tax system. And here we are being left behind, in effect, as dozens of other states are working together to try to close this particular gap.
Put your hat on, Dan.
Yeah, states did that with out-of-state catalog sales 20 or 30 years ago,
Yeah.
where most states did join to get that money.
Yes.
But you're right, not on the internet. I'm really not a Republican, but I have to continue this.
Sure.
You know,
No, this is great that you're asking these
Yeah.
questions, because these are questions that Republicans, Democrats, Independents all have, and so it's great that you're
so it's
bringing them
not,
up.
not personal. Okay.
Yeah.
But you want to get these loopholes closed and a fair tax system, basically to raise more revenue.
Well, we think that, again, two things happen. We do believe that we are starving public schools, public libraries, and a whole list of public institutions.
Okay.
We do need some additional revenue. The other thing that we would do with the additional revenue that would come through modernization is use that to lower taxes in areas where that can be done to make for a fairer system.
But I want to cut spending,
Okay.
and I don't see any cut spending coming from you guys.
Well, we again, like Jack said, we think that public structures are vital to business development. That when you ask businesses, when businesses are polled, and you can read this in lots of different magazines, the kinds of things that businesses want are quality workforce, access to education and training, good infrastructure, so that things work, so that they can get to roads, airports, access. They want good neighborhoods and high quality of life for the executives and other employees they employ. So it turns out that businesses, and these investments are good for business. There's not just some businesses, but all businesses function on top of these public structures. But whether or not you want to decrease spending or increase spending, we think it should be fair, and it's not fair. Okay, so there's people, there's wealthy organizations and companies and corporations that aren't paying their fair share, and we're paying their fair share. They're using the same roads. Their vehicles and trucks and et cetera are using the same roads as we are. We're paying our fair share with some of our taxes, and they're not. So whether it's sort of a separate question, and then we can have that debate is somewhat of a separate debate, whether we need to be spending more or spending less. But however we're raising the money, it should be broadly based, it should be fair, and everybody should pay their fair share. And then it's up to all of us whether we want to pay. But a lot of the debate in communities all over the state, it's sort of like between raising property taxes or cutting programs in schools. And what we're saying is, no, that's not the only place you can get money. That's the only place we've been drawing it, but that's not the only place to get it. There are fees, there are sales taxes, there are income taxes, and if we get what the system was designed to collect when it was created, by updating it, then we will have more money than we have now.
You know, one thing I always ask back when people say what we need to do is cut spending is, what is it you want to cut? It's easy to say, let's cut spending. It's not so easy to say, well, I think what we should do is have more kids in every classroom, or our libraries shouldn't buy new books. I mean, what is it that somebody wants to cut spending? I was on a panel just a week ago with Senator Mary Lazich, who's a veteran member of the state legislature, and she kept saying, we should cut, and a member of the audience says, well, Senator, what is it that you propose that we actually cut? And she gave one example. She said, I think we're spending too much on the state fisheries. Well, maybe we are, maybe we're not. But if someone wants to cut spending, they should come forward and say exactly what program, what highway should we leave unplowed.
I'll tell you one tension that's very real is the tension between the private sector and the public sector in terms of how much is paid for medical and healthcare
Yes.
insurance. It surfaces every time there's a local election. Those city employees, the teachers have the best medical, and it's out of balance with us taxpayers that are in the private sector. That's one that comes up all the time.
Sure, but I think the issue of healthcare cost is a huge issue.
Yeah, we haven't talked
And,
about
I mean, that's massive. Yes,
Yeah.
we need major reform of the health care system and the way in which that's financed. But the way to reform the system isn't to go to a particular employee group and say, okay, folks, you start paying more, we're cutting your benefits. That doesn't change the system.
I understand.
So,
But at the gut level, that's
Yes.
an abstract that's hard to, when you're paying, your co-payment is 500, 700, 1,000, and the next door neighbor is paying a co-payment of 50 or 100. That theory doesn't make much sense. You know, I don't know whether that's fair or not, but I mean there is a big difference, and that is a tension issue between public and private sector that continues to exacerbate. One more. I called up a free market person. I'm not free market. Okay. He said, ask these guys what happens when you tax more corporations. And he said, here's what I come up with. The company will increase their prices, which means we're going to pay more anyway. They're going to cut employment, or they're going to freeze wages, which is going to hurt the employee, or they're going to pass on costs to the stockholders and reduce their dividend. So his answer is, why don't you just tax the income of the shareholders rather than the income of the corporation?
If we had an effective, fair, and adequate income tax system, that might be a way to go.
Okay. But you're saying that's out of whack too.
That tax code is screwed up too.
Well, what we're saying is that if the decision, if a policy choice is ultimately made, let's do away with the corporate income tax in Wisconsin, that's a possible choice. I'm not ruling that out of hand, as long as we say, okay, we're losing this much revenue, let's take it here. What I do find problematic is people who would say, cut the corporate income tax, and oh, by the way, you know, our income taxes are too high. Cut the income taxes.
Yeah.
If people are willing to pay a fair share through the personal income tax, that could very well be inappropriate. So part of our whole notion of transparency is, let's get the facts out there so that when we debate tax reform, we do it with the information. And I don't see a problem with having an elimination of the corporate income tax and using a more robust personal income tax system. Perfectly fine.
Flat
as an
tax is a
alternative.
possibility?
I don't think a flat tax is a fair tax.
The problem I see with that, though, Dan, is those individuals, some of them, maybe all of them, may not live in Wisconsin. And so then they're paying additional tax to their state of residence, and we still maybe get the short end of the stick. I mean, is that a fair
Right. I mean, the
argument?
shareholders, increasingly, the shareholders for U.S. corporations don't even live in the U.S., right? So it's like, how is that money, are our tax, how are we going to design a tax to tax somebody in Dubai, or whatever so how are we going to get that money from the shareholders? That's one question that I have. The second thing, if I could address the price issue.
Right.
Well, let's also address the location. These are the two biggest concerns that sometimes people give us. It's like, it's just, we're going to pay it anyway,
gonna
just
pass
in
down.
in the form of higher prices. Well, pricing doesn't work that way. You know, it's sort of like what we've seen is corporate profits are going up. So it's not like prices is just like the cost of materials and the cost of inputs, plus we're going to tack on a couple % for our profit. You know, you get as much as you can get, right?
Right.
And so pricing doesn't work that way. And if you look at these national companies that we're talking about, PepsiCo, Kohl's, etc., Sears doesn't pay tax, nor does its, you know, Land's End or Kmart, which are subsidiaries of Sears. And I travel a lot. I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago. I was in Colorado earlier. I'll be in California tomorrow. And I travel a lot, and I clip coupons. And I look at the Sunday newspapers in whatever city I'm traveling back from. And it turns out that all of their ads are the same. The Sears ad in California and Colorado and New York is the same as the one in Wisconsin. Same products, same prices. They don't have a 50-state pricing program depending on how much tax or how little tax they're paying.
Point.
When I go to, I drive around a lot organizing around the state, and I eat a lot of fast food. And I've driven around states, other states, and eaten fast food there. And the dollar menu that I usually order from and get my double cheeseburger or my McChicken or my small fry, it turns out that it's $1 in New York, which has higher which taxes McDonald's on its corporate income. It's $1 in California, which is not only has higher corporate income taxes for McDonald's than we do, but the land prices for that McDonald's store are like 3 or 4 times. So the idea that it's a 1-for-1 ratio, that every nickel we raise in taxes is going to be a nickel we're going to be paying in increased prices, isn't borne out by our own common sense experience.
The other argument that I've heard people make is, well, if you start charging corporate income tax, these companies will just pack up and tuck their shingle under their arm, and they're going to leave the state. And I think what we're hearing, first of all, I think that's preposterous. McDonald's is not going to leave this state, for example.
Absolutely.
Walmart is not going to leave Wisconsin.
That's right.
No, but you've just explained that. You've just proven
Well,
that.
I'll give you, there's another reason too. It's a little more technical. I won't go into the details, but Wisconsin did make one change recently in its corporate income tax structure, and it was a change that said that the corporate income tax is based purely on a company's sales in Wisconsin. If a company has a factory in Wisconsin and 1,000 employees, that has no impact on the income taxes they should pay. And so if we were able to raise the income tax so that we would get some money from Microsoft or General Electric, let's say, which does have facilities in Wisconsin, they wouldn't save a penny by closing their Wisconsin operations and moving. The tax is based purely on their sales in the state. So the only way a company could avoid the income tax in Wisconsin, if the loopholes were closed, would be not to sell in Wisconsin. And you know that a company isn't going to do that. They would certainly rather make their profit and pay a little bit of it in tax than not make the profit at all, clearly.
Well, one thing that a friend said to me, we had dinner last night, and you know, the point that she made to me is, why would someone not want to get behind this? I mean, unless you are one of these companies, you know, avoiding the taxes with the loopholes, why would someone not want to get behind this?
I think most of the reason people won't get behind it is they're not aware of it. And so that's why we're talking to you, that's why we're talking to local communities, and not just to the top policymakers, but to the people who are feeling the effects of this unfairness. And there's just lots and lots and lots of energy going around in school boards and city councils in terms of what are we going to cut this year? And well, no, you shouldn't cut my thing, you should cut their thing, you know? And we're thinking that's really the wrong debate. There is wealth in Wisconsin. Yes, factories have closed, move other places, but the economy has adjusted. We're huge on biotech. You know, we're doing okay as a state in terms of the income. Now, maybe the average person has less money, but the corporations have more and more money. They're doing, you know, they have been doing very well. You know, backing out the current recession, and so we can afford healthy communities. And a lot of people are feeling like we can't afford it. The truth is, you can't afford to continue paying more property tax. But that's because even with your increase in property tax, you're seeing cuts to your services. You're seeing cuts in your schools. So that's one of the things that people kind of fuels this anger towards government. It's like, how could I be paying more and more tax and getting cruddier and cruddier service, right? It must be government's fault. It must be those employees' fault. You know, it must be the elected officials' fault. It must be my alderman's fault or the mayor's fault. Actually, it's not. We've got a system. We've got a system that's at fault, and we can fix the system.
How long did it take, you know, this whole process to close the loophole with respect to Newark papers?
Well, I think we heard about it from Mark Harris,
Our county,
your county executive,
yeah.
who sent us a packet of information. I believe that was in February, and in August it was closed.
Okay.
So I think it probably closed in less time than it took for the legislature to get a budget.
Maybe it took less time than than for the lawyers to find the loophole too. You never know. Just very quickly then, how much time have you been working so far on closing these loopholes? And this is probably going to be a bigger fight.
This is definitely a long fight. We're in it for the long run, and it's not just the corporate loopholes. There's other issues, and it's going to be going on for quite a while. And you know, I think the question that you raised just before is an excellent one. You know, why would people be against it? And there's some good reasons, but there are some bad reasons, and they really do puzzle me. Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. Why do they continue to defend the right of Microsoft to avoid all taxes and thereby put an extra burden on the large number of small local businesses? Why would a person who would, say a legislator who would say, I am pro-business, defend Merck and McDonald's being able to avoid taxes and put that burden on the local small business? It doesn't make any sense. I don't quite understand it. We all know one potential explanation, and that's the campaign finance issues in terms of where their money comes from. But it really is, intellectually, it's a puzzle why they would do that.
That's why education is so important in this.
Exactly. All right. Well, we're out of time.
Yeah.
Thank you both
Thank you
very
both.
much for being here. It was a fast
Great.
hour, I swear.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And we have been putting the website up on the show, and we'll link you up to our website and so forth, and we'll try and get the message out.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Okay,
Thank you both for coming.
All right.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks to the crew. And as always, thanks to all of you at home. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got All Right on Oshkosh.